Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Stephanie. I'm the Best Start Program Specialist. We want to welcome you all today to the Engaging with Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity series. Again, welcome. And we just want to remind you all to please sign in and choose your language. To sign in, if you are blocked from your agency, we will be providing a QR code just in a little bit. I am going to actually have Carmen come off mute for anyone that needs translation. Carmen, do you want
to? Yes, I'm here.
She is.
Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a la reunión. Si quieren escuchar esta reunión en español y están en su computadora o laptop, abajito en el tablero van a mirar un símbolo de un mundo y allí van a poder elegir el idioma de preferencia. Si están en un teléfono celular o tableta, van a ver 3 puntitos donde dice more o más y allí van a poder elegir el idioma de preferencia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Carmen. So again, for the people that just joined us, please make sure you sign in. Bridget will be providing the sign-in link. And for those who cannot sign in or are blocked from their agency, here is the QR code. I will leave it up for a couple of seconds. We will also be showing this at the end of the meeting. So just in case if you miss it, we'll have the QR code and also repost the sign-in link. So just gonna give it a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Today, inspirational words. I wish for a world that views disability, mental or physical, not as a hindrance, but as a unique attributes that can be seen as powerful assets if given the right opportunity. By Oliver Sacks. And then move on. Today's topic, we'll be talking about disability awareness and inclusion. And we have our wonderful facilitator, Shauna. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Shauna present.
People are going out, they're doing things, they want to look good, and they just continue.
Yes. Shauna, are you there?
I'm here. I was getting all my technical things together. There's so many people. I just wanted to make sure I could see at least a chunk of them on the screen.
I know we're at 82. Woohoo!
All right. Thank you again for having me. I was reached out to by my dear friend, Danielle, who has done a lot of these trainings, who contracts me out to do the ones that intersect with my identity. So I did the LGBTQ, gender and diversity training the last time. So this time I'm doing disability awareness and inclusion. Before we get started, just so everyone can hear, please make sure if you are not speaking directly with me or responding to a question, your mics remain muted. Yeah, that's it. This is not a lecture. So if you don't talk back to me, I'm just gonna go real fast. And it's not going to be as fun and as engaging. So feel free to pipe in. There's no question that is off limits. I may clutch my pearls or look a little odd for a moment, but I got you. If you were in my last training, thank you again for coming to this one. As I said, my name is Shauna Siobhan Green. I am the principal DEI consultant of DivEquify, a DEI training, facilitating, and auditing company. My pronouns are she, they, and here's how you can connect. LinkedIn, Instagram, the Twitters, and of course, Facebook.
Wait a minute, come here.
Which is where I am at the least, but I love to connect with people. There's no question that's not a good question. I'd rather help with things on the front end and be proactive than have to come in when there's a crisis and it be reactive. I was born in Washington, D.C. I've lived in Wichita, Kansas for the last 23 years. I came here as part of my military assignment.
I gave
I
her like the
am a
information.
disabled
She's like,
veteran of the United States
like,
Air
so far-
Force. I am an IT manager by day, and I teach DEI and pastor by night or by Sundays. So as you can imagine, this week is a busy one. One of my favorite quotes, and not just because I wrote it, but because it's actually really good, is your resistance to an idea or statement reveals an opportunity to increase your awareness and offers you the potential for immense growth. You may not agree with everything I say today. You may look at me and be like, "Ooh, I don't like her." That's okay. I feel no way about it. This is a chance for you to grow or to learn something new or to challenge an existing idea that you may have. So I want you to engage in the best way that you feel. If that means your camera is off and you don't say nothing, then I'm gonna go with that. If that means that you ask questions and you truly engage, I am good with that too. But I want you to understand that you have agency over how you receive the things I'm saying. My training framework is in 4 parts. Awareness. So we're going to talk a little bit about what disability is and what it means. Barriers. We're going to talk about the barriers that people with disabilities face on a day-to-day basis, whether it's in employment or out in society. We're going to have a little conversation. I have a disability treasure hunt for you where you'll break out into groups and kind of assess the accessibility in your own environments. And then the last part, we have direction. So that's the time for some action aspect of it. I'm gonna tell you what you can do going forward, because I'd be Jim Brown if I am going to tell you all this stuff about it and then not tell you what I'm gonna need for you to do after the fact. So before I get started, I always love to do a little language check. So a lot of times we all come to these trainings from our own social locations, our race, our gender, our attitudes, where we live, our environment, what they call the social determinants of health. So we may have some different perspectives on what the words mean. Well, since Sylvia and Stephanie said I'm in charge, we're going to use the language that I pick. And you may have different definitions, and that's okay. But we're going to agree on one simple language to center around. We're going to talk about chronic illness, disability, non-visible disabilities, neurodiversity, assistive technologies, and accommodations. Now, this training is not all inclusive of every single disability or person regarded with a disability, because I only got about an hour and a half with you today to 2 hours. So I could only cover so much, but there are a lot more conversations to be had and a lot of things that fall under these categories that we may not get to, but we're going to cover a good chunk today. And I'm reading the chat. So if you have a question or you have something you want to put in there, go ahead and do that too. I'm doing a whole lot in this moment. All right, we're going to start with chronic illness. Before we start there, I like to give a disclosure. I know there are 85 people in this room. I feel like I'm coming out again. But I am going to offer you how I identify in the disability spectrum. So I am a 70% disabled protected veteran. I have degenerative disc disease in my back. I get migraine headaches, which is considered a disability if they interfere or interact with your day-to-day activities. I also have ADD and anxiety. And I'm also a type 1 diabetic that is also insulin resistant. So I come to this conversation from a lot of different standpoints. And I say that to say that how we accommodate and how we look at disability has to be seen through a very intersectional lens. Because looking at me, or when people meet me, they think, oh my gosh, she is so smart, she's so nice, she's so pastorally, like she's all of these things. Because number one, I mask well, and number two, I'm very high functioning. But that doesn't mean that, you know, like a duck on top of the water, I might look real smooth up top, but my little legs are constantly kicking around down there, managing some of these other things. So the first thing I want to say is allow your lens of what disability looks like to not be limited to simply someone in a wheelchair, or someone who is missing a limb, or someone that you know may be hearing impaired or vision impaired. There is a broad spectrum of what disability looks like. So chronic diseases. Chronic diseases are conditions that last a year or more, and they require you to go to the doctor over and over again, or they limit your daily activities. The most common in our communities of common chronic illnesses are heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. And we all know, well, maybe we don't all know, but the community that is most targeted and that have loss of life because of these three specific chronic diseases are the African American and Hispanic communities. So when we later on, when we talk about social determinants of health, we'll kind of go more into that. So remember, a chronic illness has to last for a year or more. A disability. The ADA defines somebody with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits major life activity. This includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they don't have a current disability. So in the chat, someone asked, would you consider mental illness a chronic health condition? Yes, if your diagnosis has been for more than a year and it limits or interferes with your day-to-day life, yes, it is considered a chronic illness. And chronic illnesses are considered disabilities. So first of all, I want to say disability is not a medical term. Disability is a legal term. So when you start talking about a person is disabled, it doesn't always mean in the scope of what you think you see. So here it also says this includes people who have a record of an impairment, even if they don't currently have one. Those are people that are regarded as having a disability. So let's say you get cancer and you have had surgery, you have went through chemotherapy, you have done all of those things, and now by grace, you are in remission. You can still be considered a person with a disability, number one, because of the side effects of chemotherapy and some of those things that go on, you may still have limited capacity. And so your job may say, or you may be interviewing for a job and they know you have cancer or whatever the case may be. And they may say, oh, well, we're worried that this person can't do the job. What if the cancer comes back? Even if you are a person that's pregnant and a job says, well, what if they get pregnant again? According to the ADA, that is discrimination for a job to determine that because of a possibility of a return of illness or because of your disability, or if you're in the family way, whatever that looks like, it is illegal to not provide accommodation and provide opportunity for people to continue, whether it's working, education, or any other field like that. Non-visible disabilities, that's what I have. The only time you see my disability is if I'm fooling with this insulin pump that might beep because it's only on 10%. I didn't charge it last night, woe unto me. But non-visible. So oftentimes people who are neurodivergent, which we'll get into later, so my anxiety is not always visible. My diabetes is not visible. You don't walk behind me and see my discs in the back. So there are conditions that aren't immediately obvious. It can defy stereotypes of what people might think disabled people look like. And where I see that all the time is when I see an elderly person yelling at a young person for parking in a handicapped spot or a disabled spot. because they don't know what that person is dealing with. You don't know if that person is an amputee. You don't know what's going on. I also see this when there are people that have certain disabilities that may not have lost all the use of their limbs, but only have a limited capacity for the use of their limbs. So for example, you may see them in a wheelchair at some point, but then you may see them get up and walk to the restroom. And I have seen people say, well, they don't need that wheelchair. And I am, again, pearl clutch. You don't know a person's capacity or what is indeed impacting the reason for them to have that. And just because it's not visible to us doesn't mean that they do not have a legitimate or a life-altering condition that justifies the need and the use for assistive technology. Neurodiversity, that's the one that I think is most talked about right now. It's the range of differences in individual brain function and traits regarded as part of normal variation in the human population. I never like to use the word normal, but these are definitions given to us by the CDC. And because they are legal terms, I wanted you very clear on what they meant. So if in your community you come face to face with one of these discussions, you know what you're getting. So examples of neurodivergence is autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit and or hyperactivity disorder, and bipolar is also considered a neurodiversity. It's not listed here because it's fairly new and the CDC has not done their good due diligence, but bipolar disorder is also considered a neurodiversity. So I know we hear people now talking about neurodivergence and all of those things. And I always like to give, because I find in these conversations, and for those of you that were in my gender diversity class, I always try to give you the worst case scenarios, because that seems to be what happens when you start having these conversations. Somebody says something in the worst case scenario bucket, and now you have to try to explain or whatever the case may be. So I want to talk about the worst case scenario neurodiversity bucket and what people say. I got diagnosed with ADHD about a month ago. I've always known I was different and very unique is what I would say. My friends say I am particular, or I just like things a specific way. And it's true, but I always knew there were some differences in the way I did things and the way other people did things, whether that was time blindness, whether that was I could eat the same exact thing every single day. Because number one, the decision fatigue of trying to pick something to eat, but number two, because I know what it is, I don't have to make the choice. It always tastes the same, and we do those things. But there was, when I was growing up, thinking about it, am I going to tell you how old I am or not? Okay, I will. I am 43 years old. I know, I do not look that old, or I do not look that age because it's not old at all. But I am 43 years old. And as I grew up, in the community that I identify in, mental health was and still can be very stigmatized. And so what happens is during the time when I was growing up, educators, psychiatrists, and psychologists were overdiagnosing Black children with some of these diagnoses and over medicating. So parents got hyper vigilant about whether or not they were going to take their child to a doctor or whether or not they were going to get them the care they need to diagnose. When it comes to autism, autism was first studied only in young to teenage white males. And so right now you'll see a lot of older and adult women, people who or people who are gender diverse or gender nonconforming, and Black men and women getting diagnoses as they open up, because before the only symptoms were symptoms of 13-year-old white children, especially boys. So a lot of the late diagnosis that you see is not just people making stuff up or paying for them. It is because the resources, access, or stigmas prevented them from being able to get a diagnosis at a younger age, which studies have shown makes a lot of difference in how you develop strategies, which we'll talk about later. Assistive technology. AT is any item, piece of equipment, software, or products that's used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of person with disabilities. And it also doesn't, assistive technology can also be helpful in a person that doesn't have disabilities. And this class and this course is a perfect example of it. There are translators offered, there are captions available, and that is a beautiful example of what inclusivity and belonging looks like. So good job, Best Start, with making those things available. And the last piece of language that we'll talk about is accommodations. Reasonable accommodations, and remember that word reasonable is subjective, and companies and places that are not holding to the truth of accommodations will always argue reasonability. But reasonable accommodations are any modification or adjustments to a job or a work environment that enables an applicant or employee with a disability to participate in the process. So oftentimes you'll see when you go to apply for jobs, not that any of you were looking for jobs because you really love where you work and you are happy there, because I'm not telling nobody's business, but if you happen to have looked for a job in the past, you see, you'll see a spot, or you should see a spot that says, if you need assistance with applying for this position, or if you need accommodation to apply for this position, click here. If you don't see that, to me, and I'm a person of principle, and it gets me in trouble all the time. If they don't have that, I don't apply because I don't want to work for a place that doesn't offer an accommodation to folks. Because what that tells me is not only do you not hire, but you have not even made it accessible for people to hire. And then I send a little message to the email address at the bottom, and they ignore me every time, but I'm still doing my part out here. So another element of that and accommodation is a lot of times when you apply for jobs now, at the very end, they have a self-disclosure statement. And that self-disclosure statement is going to ask you 3 questions. It's going to say, are you a veteran? Are you a protected veteran? Or are you not a veteran? Once you answer that, I am a protected veteran. A protected veteran is anyone who has served and has received a rating of disability over 30% by the US government. So once you check that, it then goes on to ask you, regardless of which one you check, if you have a disability. And they list some disabilities all the way from asthma, diabetes is listed, neurological, it says to group all of those together, but they list a bunch of them. And if you say yes, you get a whole statement about how the US government has mandated certain organizations to have at least 7% of their workforce be disabled people or people with disabilities. And we'll talk about the difference between that statement. Do I believe that they're holding true to that? No. And do I believe that self-disclosure is important? Because you can say no and just flow with it. Do I think it's important? I do, but in some ways I think it's very much like the check the box when you have been convicted of a crime. I feel that some organizations who ain't trying to get that 7% be like, ooh, no, have a good day. So it's kind of a catch-22, or like my grandma say, you stuck between that rock and a hard place on whether or not to disclose a disability, and you are not legally required to. I just want to be clear with that. Nor is your employer legally allowed to ask you if you have a disability. Like in an interview, they can't be like, so girl, do you got a disability? I noticed you limping in from the parking lot. Did you stub your toe, or is there something else going on here? And then the last part is person first versus identity first language. So in person first language, it puts the person before their condition. So instead of saying wheelchair bound, which is not appropriate, it is a person in a wheelchair. Instead of saying, oh, she's a diabetic, no, she's a person with diabetes. And it applies to other things too. Instead of saying, oh, that's a homeless person. No, that's a person experiencing homelessness. Because what happens is it humanizes first and categorizes later. Now, there are communities within the disability community that say, we don't want that person first language. So for example, in the autistic community, they prefer, and the majority, because again, it is a person by person thing, it has been said that the autistic community prefers to be identified as autistic persons. They want to put their spectrum first because it makes them unique. It's who they are. And some other people may like that too. But I think it's always best to ask. It's like pronouns. When in doubt, just ask somebody. And if you're corrected, receive the correction and keep it moving. Like, you don't have to give them a briefing on what person first language is or what identity first language is. I bet you know how you like to be referred to. And so does everyone else. Are there any questions on the terminology? Let's have a little check-in. Is there anything that you did not know? Have you been in a situation where those worst case scenarios have come up where someone has said something? You can chat with me in the chat or raise your hand or unmute your mic because I might not see one hand out of 85. If y'all don't talk to me, I'm just call on people.
We have somebody in the chat.
I love it. Let's see.
That just says that even though you know some of the normal, they send it directly to me too, and it said that even though you know some of the normal, categories, it's good to know like the deeper dive that you're taking into that. So.
Awesome. Anybody else? We're gonna get through this training in 19 minutes if nobody talk. Okay. There'll be another chance. I'll be more strict that second time. This is the get to know you phase. Let's talk about barriers for persons with disability. Thank you, Jacqueline, in the comments. She says, thank you for clarifying the terminology. It gets difficult on how to make the right choice on how to address someone. It does. And we have a lot more to hold in our heads, right? We have pronouns, we have gender identity, we have, if you have a disability, if someone has all of these intersecting identities, you got to work on it and kind of get it together in your mind. So here are the 7 barriers for people with disabilities. These are the most recognized. There could be hundreds of barriers if I'm just being clear, but these are the most recognized. Attitudinal, policy, programmatic, communication, physical, social, and transportation. So let's talk about these attitudes. An attitudinal barrier, that's when people stereotype, stigmas, prejudice, and discrimination. A lot of times, people with disabilities do not, and I use the term come out because, well, number one, I'm gay, but number two, it's just the easier way to explain the whole revealing something that you aren't sure how people are going to respond to conversation. So a lot of times people with disabilities don't share that, especially non-visible ones, because of how they're stereotyped or because of the stigma surrounding it, because of the discrimination that they are afraid they're going to face. So for example, I held on to a piece of my confession earlier so I could save it for this part. I am a person with PTSD. A lot of times people think that that means that one day because I've been in the military, think one day I'm gonna snap and do something crazy, whatever the case may be, or do something out of character or whatever. But that's not the only version of PTSD. This ain't the movies. Like, this is real life and people are dealing with some real things, and PTSD doesn't only come from military things. PTSD can be triggered by sexual assault. It can be triggered by childhood trauma. If your house burned down when you were 12 years old, every time you hear the ambulance, you may still be impacted and triggered, or you may still have nightmares. Of course, the DSM-5 will go into the details of what PTSD is and how that diagnosing goes, but it's more to it than just let's shoot up the place because I went to war. So thinking about that, I like to ask people to be on both sides. So consider the areas where you have stereotyped. Consider the areas where you have had a prejudice or based on something you thought about a marginalized or disabled community member that caused you to not, whether that's to not befriend, to not have conversation, to stare uncontrollably, whatever that looks like. And I just thought about something else that we should not say. So let's stop at attitude and jump back to language. The term able-bodied. I know a lot of people use that term right now to identify as non-disabled people, but disabled people are able to do things too. So saying able-bodied is a place of privilege that it suggests that a person who is disabled or other-abled doesn't have ability to do whatever it is that they're trying to do. So the better term for able-bodied is a non-disabled person, a person without disability, instead of centering ability. I just remembered that. Someone in the chat, see, this is why we teach these courses. Someone in the chat said they were let go from a job 5 minutes after they started due to an eye injury. I wear dark glasses and that's why they let me go. And I bet nowhere in there was there accommodation, no conversation about accommodation. And they bet on the fact that we won't have the resources to sue and go to the EEOC and the ADA and all of those things. That is so unfortunate. I get mad about this kind of stuff. Let me get myself together. Communication barriers. Written or spoken messages that prevent people with vision or hearing impairments from receiving the message. This is like not having captioning or not having an interpreter available if that is the need. And my recommendation is even for these type of classes, and I don't know what the statement that went out inviting people is to ask at the bottom of the page or the bottom of the form, are there any accommodations that you will need to attend this training? And so people can put in, so you're not going around hustling up people. Hey, anybody in the room knows sign language? Hey, anybody in the room speak French? Anybody in the room? All of those things, because now you're asking someone to do free intellectual labor, which is problematic too, but that's not the training that we're doing today. But ask the question, do you need any accommodations? Will you need any accommodations? Another part is the use of technical language, long sentences and words with a whole bunch of syllables for people with cognitive impairment. I tell people all the time, now I know you went and got your GED, your high school diploma, your bachelor's, your master's, your PhD, your postdoctorate work, but talk to me like I need to know what you're saying. You don't have to flex your language for me. There are times where certain jargon and certain words are more appropriate, but if you are a care provider or a service worker, you have to speak to people in a language and with a heart set that they can understand, because it feels horrible to be spoken to in a way that you don't get it and recognize that it's intentional. And I think a lot of you can relate. A lot of people are shaking their head. You know when somebody's just trying to flex for you or flex on you. And I always be like, this ain't the flex you think it is, because while I understand, now I got an attitude, and so we can't even communicate no more. But it doesn't feel good. So if it don't feel good to you, I can guarantee it doesn't feel good to the communities you serve. Now, on the other side, I'm not saying talk to everybody like they're 3 years old. Like we can't assume cognitive ability. But if you pick, I like to tell people, if you pick about a good 8th to 9th grade level to communicate to people on, everybody's gonna get that and nobody feels less, especially when you're serving in community where you're meeting people for the first time and you're having to give them important information that impacts their life. Physical barriers, I'm sure everyone gets this one right out the gate. Those structural obstacles, natural or man-made. Structural tried to catch me up right there for a minute. Natural or man-made environments that prevent or block mobility. I have seen people invite someone to a place, and I know that that person's is a person in a wheelchair. And I ask, how they gonna get here? How they gonna get up your steps? And the amount of awareness that people have to those type of things. You work in a place and you invited your friend to lunch and there's no elevator, and the cafeteria or where you got to eat is on the second floor. How they gonna get there? Or the door don't automatically open. It's a double door system. How they getting in? So thinking about those structural things, somebody need to ride the bus, but the bus doesn't have a lift that drops down and allows for a wheelchair user. I went to Chicago for my honeymoon last year. All them buses had lifts. I was like, okay. And little hydraulics that like they kind of dropped it low. So you didn't have to take that big step to get on the bus and almost break your leg and your hip while you're trying to do it. And then the beginning of the bus was for wheelchairs only. And this lady tried to stand there with her privileged self. And the bus driver was like, I'm not moving the bus until you move. And she was like, there's no wheelchairs here. And he was like, I know it, you ain't in one. And she had to move. And I said, ooh, they don't play in Chicago. And so she had to move out the way because that location is for disabled riders. And so often I see when you use public transportation, people just sit there when there's no seats available. And now a person with a disability, now they got to ask you to get up or ask you to move, or can you create some space? And no one should have to do that. Nobody. Policy. This is what happened to the person that got fired in 5 minutes. Denying reasonable accommodations to qualify individuals with disabilities so that they can perform the tasks. Jobs do this all the time. Stores do it. Places do it. They say you can't work remote, but you have an illness that requires that some days, maybe you have IBS. That's a good one. Maybe, well, not a good thing to have, but a good example. Maybe you have IBS and sometimes you have to be in the privacy of your own restroom. So a reasonable accommodation is while you're in a flare-up, you can work from home. Some jobs have a no remote policy. There are jobs that you'll submit your ADA accommodation paperwork and they can deny it and say you no longer meet the requirements of the job. So that's what the policy means. It's policy set up to deny reasonable accommodations. Someone said in the chat, the pandemic has proven all those employers claiming this job can't be done remotely to be wrong. You are so right. You are absolutely right. And it's cheaper too, because please, you don't have to have an office for me. Let me work at my house. Programmatic. Lack of accessible equipment, and providers' attitudes, knowledge, and understanding of people with disabilities. So it would be a programmatic fail if there weren't interpreters available. It would be a programmatic fail if someone was hearing impaired and vision impaired, and there wasn't some type of technology that made the course available. There are captions, so that's a good thing, but programmatic things are when we do these events and these trainings and workshops and all of those things, and there are people who cannot access them. But also it's provider attitude. And this is a big thing because I see a lot of this in Black, Brown, and people of color communities where providers have certain attitudes towards marginalized people. And so I remember I went to the hospital and my blood sugar was 1,080 and the doctor thought I was medication seeking. And so she was treating me crazy until this one man who looked like he just stepped off of the set of Grey's Anatomy came rushing in, hollering and screaming about get the pump, prep for surgery. Her blood sugar's this. It was a mess. And, but that doctor, because I don't know if it was because I was Black. I don't know if it was because I was kind of groggy. Normal blood sugar is 80 to 120. People die over 500. But she was the most disrespectful, rudest person. And when I say that man, McSteamy, or whatever his name was, came in and pushed her on out the way because she had an attitude that was biased, possibly anti-Black, possibly homophobic, whatever condition I met, she had a bias. And so providers can be that way, whether it's therapists, whether it's your doctor, whether you are a provider. Think about your attitude and start unpacking some of that cultural and mental and implicit bias, which I bet you I probably did a training on knowing Danielle. Social, this is where we're talking about social determinants of health. We heard that phrase a lot during COVID. And it's talked about a lot in Black maternal mortality, but related to the conditions in which we're born, where you grow, live, learn, work, and age, are social determinants of health that contribute to decreased functioning. So this is a question I like to ask. If you know who Sandra Bland and Freddie Gray were, put yes in the chat or raise your hand. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Perfect. Here's a bonus question. Outside of race or the fact that they were in the same city, what is something that they had in common? Or and not to include the state sanctioned murder by police, but what is something they had in common that fits into the conversation? It's the double jeopardy. I will tell you. Okay, Steph, community. Okay. Both were tortured. Thank you, Jenka. They both had lead poisoning. They grew up in a community where the government did not require lead abatement programs, and they both had documented lead poisoning that they were both receiving government benefits for, because it has been proven through a study that Johns Hopkins University did, where they paid slumlords and landlords to allow single mothers and single families to move into lead-filled apartments to study the impact of lead on children. I know. The comments are like, what? So the IQ of a child with lead poisoning can be decreased by 10 to 20% because of lead, that they intentionally let people move into these communities, government programs. And so they both had lead poisoning. Now, so the question becomes, if they had not been subjected to those social determinants of health where they lived, would they have been impacted by an illness that decreases cognitive development? And would they have been targeted by the police in the same way? So this is what we talk about when we talk about the social aspect of disability. It's not simply if you were born blind or born with MS or you have Parkinson's or whatever those things are. It's what has contributed to the disability and how is that still contributing to the decreased functionality of the person in community. I'm trying to give y'all a minute to process. Take a sip of your beverage. Transportation, we covered lack of access to accessible or convenient transportation. I live in a city where the bus system is, whack. I can't think of a better word. I grew up in DC. It was fabulous. I've been to Chicago. We didn't pay for but like one Uber, and that was because we was going way to the other side of town. We was on the air, we was riding. I was trying to act like I was from there. We was doing the most on them buses and trains. But what about people who live in rural communities? What about people who can't afford a month-long bus pass or CTA card or whatever your city calls them? What about people who don't feel safe in an Uber because they're vision impaired? How they getting around? What accommodations is your city, state, or place of employment making to make that accessible? Jenka said it right now, they still have lead in the water in Flint, Michigan. There's a book called A Mind is a Terrible Thing to Waste, and it's about environmental racism. There was an older gentleman who lived in another city, but his family lived in Flint before it all came out. He moved to Flint to be closer to his family, and within a year, he had pancreatic cancer and died. And it wasn't because, and they traced it back to the lead. So that is another social determinant of health. So if you came to my last course, we talked about intersectionality. And intersectionality is just a lens which you see where power structures collide. So it's about not just addressing a singular problem or an individual problem, but recognizing that some people have problems at a variety of intersections, and to really impact their life, you got to address a few different things. So a person may not only have a disability and be and have to deal with the barriers. Maybe there's some racial inequity going on. Maybe there's some gender inequality going on. Maybe there's some socioeconomic or class issues. So you can't just address the barrier that they have over here. So they can't. So let's say you have a disabled person that can't find housing, and in your mind, or because you're only looking at that one thing and you have shades on, you think, okay, well, I just have to find them accessible community. Well, that may not be the only thing. Let's say that person with a disability is also a person of transgendered experience. So they're being denied, not because they have a disability, but because they're transgendered. Now, what do? Well, this person is also Black. So this landlord don't like Black people. So how you gonna solve that problem? Or this person is on Section 8 or another state provided housing allowance. So now you got 4 problems to solve, but you was only thinking they just needed a wheelchair ramp. No, baby, they need more than a wheelchair ramp. They need a whole lot of other stuff. You got to find someone that will accept all of their intersecting identities. That's intersectional care. That's wraparound. So let's talk to you for a minute. What are some barriers? So we've talked about the barriers. We talked about the barriers in community. I'm in Wichita, so all my slides are always directed at me. Like, what are some in Wichita? But for you, it's in California or wherever you may be checking in from. What are some barriers you've seen in your organization or in your city that this conversation has kind of brought to your awareness? And you can respond in the chat. I'll read those, or you can unmute or raise your hand. The local government. Marcella, it's always the government, isn't it? Anybody
Hello.
gonna unmute their mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Marcella.
Oh, okay, Marcella.
Yeah, so what we've seen here, or I've seen, I'll say only for myself, is our local government doesn't like people that are experiencing homelessness or experiencing mental health issues. And so they have put up a lot of barriers for housing, for other programs that might be available to them or that could be funded through both county and state revenues. So it really does hurt them. And like Teresina just said, there's just a lack of access to basic needs, like basic life needs. And it really is sad. And it makes our job, which is already hard, just that much more difficult.
Yeah. And that is hard. And those barriers, Teresina said, lack of access to the needs of life. Like you said, public transportation, food,
because we
shelter.
live, I'm sorry, because we live in an area that has vast areas of nothing, and they're not allowing housing to be built. It's ridiculous because that's what they need is housing.
Yeah.
One of the things we also just found that we're finding in some of the data that's being collected around here is that even though we are a little bit isolated within LA County, we are still part of LA County. And what the data, recent data, health data has shown is that some of our areas where we experience more of the low income families and residents that live there, we are finding that they, compared to the rest of LA County, they are more likely, for the same age group, they are more likely to die 6 years earlier than the rest of the county. So clearly there's a lot of health inequities that are affecting this as well.
Wow. And the way you all are doing this right now, that's exactly why I do these trainings. You're finding the intersections, you're figuring out how it impacts you, and you're like, oh, snap, like 6 years? You know what a person can do with 6 more years, or what a person can do? And when I talk about age, I like to think of, like, what if it would, think of a child that's 6 years old, what impact would that have on losing? So whether it's at the beginning of life or the end of life, 6 years is a long time for society to take off, because it doesn't have to be this way. I just want to be clear. It doesn't have to be this way. It is this way, but it doesn't have to be. Jacob says, here in Portland, there's a real lack of mental health services and people aren't able to get ongoing mental health support and treatment, just treating crisis, then back out on the street. And that's hard too, because sometimes crisis is people calling the police. And the police do not have the tools, the training, and the ability and awareness to always treat those with care, especially in our communities of color. And we have seen time and time again how that turns out.
We had an organization, one of the largest mental health agencies that provides services to children and families. They just got awarded a $60 million contract to provide mobile services throughout LA County and to provide assessments. So they're taking, and they're called like the emergency response teams, psychiatric emergency response teams that have a therapist, they've got a nurse, they've got an outreach person. So this agency just got that $60 million grant.
Wow.
And they can't hire anybody for these teams. They're paying more than any other mental health services providers. They're paying more than the county. They're paying more than Department of Mental Health, and they cannot hire enough people for these teams.
Wow. Wow. And a lot of that is those, the barrier of discrimination, stereotyping, judgment.
They had certain mandates that they were you had to be a licensed therapist, and because they were getting no turnout in any resumes, they ended up having to bring down their standards. And I don't look at it as bring down the standards, because you could have somebody that may not have a master's degree with the same kind of experience or even better experience and knowledge than somebody who's licensed. So I look at it as like they're opening doors maybe to other people as opposed to dropping their standards.
I call that allowing for the scholarship of lived experience. That's one of my favorite phrases. All right, y'all ready for some breakout groups, a bio break, some of that, so you can go to the bathroom, get you a Dr. Pepper and do whatever you need to do. Nicole's shaking there, yeah. So we are going to, let's see, there's 91 folks, about to be 92. I think Stephanie's going to put you all in some breakout groups because we're going to do a disability and awareness treasure hunt. We're going to post the questions in the chat. There are 19 total questions. And we can grab 4 or 5. Each group can get like 5 of them. Or you can look at them and answer. Since there's so many, you can look at answer 5 of any one you want. I'm only going to call on a few different people to explore and share what their group came up with. So it'll be no more than 10 people in a group. We will go into breakouts. Sylvia, what time are we done today? 1:30? 1? Sylvia, Stephanie, anybody?
11 our time, so I believe that's 1 your time.
Oh, so we're done at 11 your time?
Yeah.
Okay, let me get my
We got
brain.
30 minutes. Sorry, that was
Ooh,
on mute.
Jesus. Okay, so I will give you all 15 minutes in the breakout rooms to assess your community and its disability awareness and inclusion. And don't be making stuff up either. Tell the truth, shame the devil. Let me know how inclusive or not your workplace, where you work, where you live, where you worship, where you play, whatever it is. Let me know how it goes.
I'm gonna open them up right now.
A new link so that we can get everybody the credit for being here today.
And everyone's coming back in.
Do you want me to sit, Stephanie, or do you want to do it?
What was that? Sorry.
Huh?
What was that, Sylvia? Sorry.
Do you want to talk about that, the sign-in sheet, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, I'll announce it right now.
Okay.
Everybody back in. Hi, everyone. Unfortunately, we did. Oh, sorry, Shauna. Can I do the announcement really quick?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Hi, everyone. Sorry, we did have a glitch on our sign-in sheet. So we will be providing a new link shortly, and also for the QR code, we'll be showing that at the end as well. Sorry about that. Thank you, everyone.
So we can have everybody, as soon as Stephanie puts the new link in, we could have everybody sign in just to make sure that you get credit for being here.
Oh, that's a trash guy. I'm like, is that wind?
Right, we are back. Everybody make sure your mics are muted. I know you're coming in from the groups. Do, 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 do. All right, so how did that go for everybody? I know we had some technical difficulties on the questions. You have my deepest and most sincere apologies on that. But you kind of knew what the assignment was, so you could kind of gauge it a bit, a little peer supported group work. Would anyone like to share the overall vibe of their room and what you all found from an accessibility or disability awareness standpoint? And you could do so in the chat as well. Anybody?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So there was a couple questions that I wasn't prepared for, like or that I hadn't thought about, I guess. Like the one about a quiet space. I did not even think about that, but now that it's there, it makes 100% sense. And yeah, that was the only one that caught me off guard, I think. And I was like, oh, but then as soon as I read it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Why wouldn't we have that? Like,
Perfect. Good. The chat says the questions were great to reflect on. Will they be shared? Absolutely. We sadly see we are flawed and lacking, but we have decided to go to the safety team with our concerns. Come through, policy advocates. Let's go to this good safety team. Okay. For us, it was surprising to see that our community had a lot more in place to make the city more accessible. Go that community. I like that. Someone said they learned they could work on awareness. That is why we do this. We do have more work, but doing pretty good. That should make you feel good. Did everybody know the height of their local Starbucks or local coffee counter? Is it accessible? Does a person have to reach all the way up or someone have to lean down? Made some new friends.
Our Starbucks across the street does have it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Next time you go out to eat, ask, do they have a Braille menu? We talked a bit about sensory spaces and family spaces. And oh my goodness, to avoid fluorescent lighting in these rooms. Yes, indeed, as a person that suffers migraines, my heavens, them fluorescent lights, they give me the business. I love that. The family spaces, absolutely. Okay, y'all did so good. Let me see what time it is. Oh boy, I gotta talk fast. All right, we are in the now what phase of our conversation. Someone said there were a couple questions that they weren't sure of as far as restaurants. We didn't get all the questions. Again, my deepest apologies on that. And that this is eye-opening. Yay, that's what we want. So now what? What y'all gonna do? So the safety team folks, love it. We doing that. Ancestor Maya Angelou says, let me move the chat. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. I'm going to add a little bit to the ancestral wisdom of Auntie Maya and say, do the best you can until you know better. Apply what you know. Then when you know better, apply it, do better. Because a lot of people know better, honey. Like, folks know better. It's just they do not apply the things that they know better in so that they can do better. Because knowing better without application, do better is not possible. So there's a little piece in the middle of there. So inclusion versus belonging. Inclusion is an organizational conversation. It's the practice and the policies that provide equal access. But belonging is more individual. It's how you feel secure or supported or accepted in a certain group. Inclusivity is great. I am all about organizations doing what it takes to ensure diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments. But belonging is like the jelly on a warm piece of toast. The belonging piece, where a person feels welcome, they feel included, they feel like they can express and be their authentic self, that's the target. That's the goal. Inclusion is the whole target. So if you hit on the outside of the red circle, it's okay. You're all right. But belonging is that sweet spot. So when we talk about what's next and the actions we need to do, I'm a sucker for acronyms, just know that. Acronyms and alliteration are my jam. So the first one is CARE. Consider accessibility and reasonable efforts. I know that individual solutions to systemic problems do not change the world. I know that. But I also know that if you get enough individuals together in a common goal to solve a systemic or systematic problem, there's results. So just the fact that you all are sitting here in consideration of what I'm talking about, understanding disability awareness, what inclusion looks like, what a day in the life could be, how they get transportation, all of those things, that is the first step. Step 2 is lead. Learn, educate, and advocate for disability rights. That is going to the safety team. That is asking, noticing that a coworker is struggling with something, be like, have you checked about reasonable accommodations? Like, you don't have to suffer. That's making sure your staff and employees know about FMLA. That's all of those things that go into educating and advocating. And I know everybody may not have as big or as much personality as I seem to, but there are ways and areas of responsibility where we all, within the scope of our capacity, can do this work. And the last one is action. Advocate for comprehensive and tailored solutions and inclusive organizational networks. Comprehensive and tailored, the C and the T being the key. It's no point if the bus has a lift on it, if the doctor's office has 4 steps to get into it. That's not comprehensive. You didn't got them there and now they stuck. And I'm sorry, you saying call somebody and they'll push your wheelchair up the steps is not acceptable, and it's not accessible. There was a girl in Philadelphia somewhere that goes to her favorite bar and has to get carried up the stairs by the bouncer to use the bathroom, and these 2 college students pushed her wheelchair down the stairs and broke it. So that's not okay. So now this person cannot even get around. So of course the bar and all of that got her a new wheelchair and all of those things, or got it fixed or whatever the case may be. But my gracious, you have to be carried up the steps, because certain buildings, especially historical ones, or certain buildings built before a certain time, do not have to accommodate ADA. They do not have to come into code with ADA. So comprehensive and then tailored solutions. If you are an employer or if you are a service provider and you see that first time someone can't get in, move the meeting. Say, we're going to do our meetings off-site at an accessible location so that everyone can attend. Or have lamps available to move. The person that brought up fluorescent lighting, that is such a great accommodation. So if you are in a meeting space and you know someone is struggling, okay. If you are a manager and you know that you have an employee that may be on the autistic spectrum or that deals with sensory things, make a rule that only one person talks at a time. Or have smaller meetings. Because we don't want to go to meetings no way. Like, I mean, tell the truth, everybody. We sick of meetings, but do your part. What happens if you mess up and get it wrong? You use first person language instead of identity language, or vice versa. You say able-bodied and someone says something. Remain open. The conversation may include topics and comments you're not familiar with, but just be willing to listen. And I like to tell people, if you are not part of the marginalized group that's correcting you, now ain't the time for you to get an attitude and tone police. I don't advocate people talking to people crazy, and I don't let nobody talk to me crazy. But if I mess up, how the person corrects me, while it does go a long way, it may not be time to be like, don't talk to me like that. Be open, have a little kindness, have a little grace. You don't know how many times this person has had this conversation. And if you are part of a marginalized group, please remember that you can be marginalized in one way and oppressive in another way. Just because you may be a white person who is in the LGBTQ community, there's a possibility that you can still be anti-Black or anti-trans. So being part of a marginalized community isn't this signpost that says, I got it all together, I got it right. Research and learn. Don't just take my word for it. If you want to get in these conversations, if you want to raise your awareness, do some research. Because I guarantee you, when you can do it in your language, it's more impactful in your community. The last thing is receive feedback. None of us know it all. We don't get it right every time. Ask for help. Consult when you need it. So in the chat or with your emojis, let me know how you experienced today's topic. How do you feel? Did it rub you the wrong way? Or is it like, oh, okay, I got it. So feel free to put it in the chat, give a thumbs up. There's some hearts. Purple's my favorite color, thank you. Perfect, perfect, perfect. I am so glad to be with you today, but I will not leave you without resources. I will send the slides, I will send the questions, and here are some books that will help you further your research. The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. Oh my gosh, so good, so good. I want to add one more so and say so good, because that's how good it is. My Body is Not a Prayer Request. For those of you that navigate in Christian or evangelical spaces, amazing book, eye-opening. Crip Kinship, The Disability Justice and Art Activism of Sims Invalid. Love it. And the last one is Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. Now is the time before we say our goodbyes. If anyone has any questions or comments, let me know. Thank you for all the positive comments in the chat and for all those people asking they want to do more work. That is what Best Start is doing. Connect with Sylvia and Stephanie and find out how you two can become part of the movement.
Thank you, Shauna. And very shortly, I know we have a couple minutes left. If there's no questions, I'll share my screen. All right. And this is Shauna's contact information, everyone.
And I just want to remind everybody, today, choose joy. This picture is, I was laughing at my child. We all deserve moments of mediocrity and joy. We do not have to operate at excellence all the time. Smile today, laugh today, live today. Radical joy.
You are hilarious. We love your energy. We're so thankful to have you here with us, and we look forward to more interactions. Want to thank everybody for being here and taking the time to come in with an open mind, being flexible, and really just looking to learn or taking in some of these tools that we can use out in the community to have some of these conversations. And some of these conversations are uncomfortable and tough, but you know what? That's part of what we're doing here. That's the spirit of what we want. And bring a healthier community for us. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Happy Friday. And we will see you guys again soon. And when Stephanie will be sending out the slides, we'll be sending out the questions, and then we'll be sending out the reminders for our next meeting. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
And also here's the QR code for anybody who needs it. This is the updated sign-in sheet. And then I will provide this link.
I see the Best Start link.
Sorry, Bridget also put in our link tree. If you go to our link tree, you will have, it'll give you a list of all the events, everything that we're doing out in the community through Best Start, and also how to join our Best Start program. So we invite everybody to do that.
Hi, I see the link for the link tree, but I don't see for the one for us to sign up, do the sign up all over again.
Okay, Steph, if you don't mind adding that in there again, you have to scroll way up, but yeah, we'll add it right now again so that you can sign in.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And if you cannot access the link, the QR code also allows you to go to the sign-in, the updated sign-in.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.